before the first city rose beside a river, before kings carved their victories into stone, and before human beings learned to preserve their memories in writing an ancient story, described a place of perfect order, a garden filled with life, a land untouched by violence, exhaustion, or death, a sanctuary where humanity lived in the presence of its creator. Its name was Eden. For thousands of years, believers, historians, geographers, and explorers have searched for clues to its location. Some have looked toward the valleys of Mesopotamia. Others have studied the mountains of eastern Turkey, the ancient riverbeds of Arabia, or the submerged landscapes beneath the Persian Gulf. No expedition has found a gate guarded by fire. No excavation has uncovered a sign bearing the name Eden, and no archaeological discovery has settled the mystery. Yet the biblical account contains details that seem surprisingly geographical. It names rivers. It describes surrounding lands. It refers to gold, aromatic resin, and precious stone. It presents Eden not as a distant cloud world, but as a place connected to the landscape of the ancient Near East. So what exactly was Eden? Was it a physical garden whose location has been erased by time? Was it a sacred landscape described through theological symbolism? Or could it have been both a real place, whose deeper meaning extends far beyond geography? To investigate the mystery, we must begin not with modern maps, but with the words of Genesis. The text says that God planted a garden in Eden toward the east, and placed the first human being there. That wording creates an important distinction. The garden and Eden may not have been identical. Eden appears to describe a larger region, while the garden was a special cultivated sanctuary within it. It was a place deliberately prepared for human life responsibility and communion with God. The garden contained trees that were pleasing to the eye and suitable for food. But two trees stood at the center of the story, the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The first represented continued life in the presence of God. The second marked a boundary that humanity was commanded not to cross. Adam was placed in the garden to work it and guard it. Even in paradise, humanity was not created for passivity. The garden required care. The first human vocation was not conquest warfare or commerce. It was stewardship. This detail reveals that Eden was more than a place of comfort. It was a sacred assignment. Humanity was given a world to cultivate without exploiting it, authority without violence, and freedom within a relationship of trust. But the account soon moves from theology into geography. Genesis describes a river flowing out of Eden to water the garden. From there, the river divided into 4 branches. Their names were Pishon, Gihon, Tigris, and Euphrates. 2 of these rivers are immediately recognizable. The Tigris and Euphrates shaped the history of Mesopotamia, the region later associated with Sumer, Akkad, Babylon, and Assyria. Their waters supported farms, cities, temples, and some of the earliest known states in human history. The presence of these names has led generations of readers to search for Eden somewhere within the ancient Near East. But the problem begins with the other 2 rivers. The Pishon is said to flow around the land of Havilah, a region associated in the text with gold and valuable materials. The Gihon is described as flowing around the land of Cush. Neither river can be identified with certainty. This has created one of the oldest geographical puzzles in biblical interpretation. If the Tigris and Euphrates are the same rivers known today, where were the Pishon and Gihon? Did they dry up? Were their names changed? Were they ancient river systems that no longer exist? Or does the text preserve a map of a world whose landscapes were radically altered by geological and climatic change? The modern Middle East can easily mislead us. Regions now dominated by desert were not always so dry. Ancient climate patterns shifted. Lakes expanded and disappeared. Rivers changed course. Coastlines moved. Land that is now submerged beneath the Persian Gulf may once have been exposed. The geography of the ancient world was not fixed. This fact does not prove any particular Eden theory, but it explains why a direct comparison between Genesis and a modern map may fail. One of the most widely discussed possibilities places Eden in southern Mesopotamia, near the head of the Persian Gulf. Today, the Tigris and Euphrates eventually combine and flow toward the Gulf through a waterway known as the Shat al-Arab. In antiquity, however, the coastline was different, and the rivers may have followed separate channels farther south. During periods of lower sea level, parts of the present Gulf were dry land. Some researchers have proposed that this submerged basin may once have contained freshwater springs, river systems, wetlands, and habitable plains. Human communities could have lived there before rising waters transformed the region. From this perspective, the Eden tradition may preserve a distant memory of a fertile landscape later lost beneath the sea. The theory is compelling because it connects the known rivers with a vanished environment, but it remains a theory. No excavated site beneath the Gulf has been identified as the Garden of Eden. No artifact can confirm that the biblical account refers to this landscape. The geological possibility is real, but the archaeological evidence is incomplete. Another theory moves the search northward. The Tigris and Euphrates both originate in the highlands of eastern Turkey. In this mountainous region, river systems spread outward across different territories. Some interpreters argue that the phrase describing the river dividing into 4 branches may fit a highland setting more naturally than a southern delta. Mountains are also important in ancient religious geography. Many cultures imagined sacred places as elevated locations where heaven and earth met. Could Eden have been located somewhere near the sources of the great Mesopotamian rivers? Supporters point toward the Armenian highlands and nearby regions. They note that this area lies within the wider world of several early biblical traditions and near Mount Ararat, which later becomes associated with Noah's Ark. But this theory faces the same unresolved difficulty. The Pishon and Gihon remain uncertain. A third major proposal turns toward the Arabian Peninsula. Satellite imagery and geological surveys have revealed traces of ancient watercourses crossing areas that are now desert. Long before the present climate parts of Arabia experienced wetter conditions, rivers, lakes, grasslands, and human communities existed where sand now dominates the horizon. Some researchers have attempted to identify one of these ancient channels with the Pishon. This proposal becomes especially interesting because Genesis connects Havilah with gold. Arabia contained regions known in antiquity for valuable minerals, incense, and long-distance trade. Could the Pishon have been a river that once flowed across Arabia toward Mesopotamia or the Persian Gulf? The idea fits some details, but not all. Ancient riverbeds can be mapped, yet identifying their biblical names is another matter entirely. A dry channel does not come with an inscription declaring that it was once the Pishon. The evidence can support possibility. It cannot establish certainty. The Gihon creates an even more difficult problem. Because the text links it with Cush, some ancient and later interpreters associated it with the Nile, since Cush is often connected with lands south of Egypt. But the Nile lies far from the Tigris and Euphrates. To place all 4 rivers within a single geographical system would require a map very different from the one we know. This has led some scholars to conclude that the rivers should not be interpreted as a straightforward modern drainage system. Perhaps the account draws together major waterways known to the ancient world in order to portray Eden as the source of universal abundance. In that reading, the 4 rivers function not merely as coordinates, but as symbols of life flowing outward from the divine presence. This interpretation gains strength when Eden is compared with later sacred spaces in the Bible. The tabernacle and temple contain imagery that recalls a garden. Cherubim appear in their decorations. Palm trees, flowers, fruit, and gold fill the sanctuary. The temple is not described as an ordinary building. It is presented as a place where heaven and earth meet, where God dwells among his people. Eden may therefore function as the first sanctuary. Adam's responsibility to work and guard the garden resembles language later used for priestly service. The garden contains precious materials that also appear in later worship settings. God is described as present there, and humanity is given sacred responsibility within that presence. Seen this way, Eden is not only humanity's first home, it is humanity's first temple, and the expulsion from the garden is not merely the loss of beautiful land. It is exile from sacred space. After Adam and Eve disobey, the relationship between humanity creation and God is fractured. The couple becomes aware of their nakedness. They hide. Trust gives way to fear. Harmony gives way to accusation. The ground becomes associated with hardship. Human life becomes shadowed by death. Then the entrance to the garden is guarded by cherubim and a flaming sword. The way to the tree of life is closed. From that moment, the search for Eden becomes more than a search for geography. It becomes a search for what humanity lost. The account does not say that Adam and Eve forgot where the garden stood. It says they could no longer enter it. That distinction matters. The obstacle was not ignorance. It was separation. A person could theoretically know the direction of Eden and still be unable to return. This may explain why the garden disappears from the later narrative. No king captures it. No traveler rediscovers it. No prophet leads an expedition to its gates. Eden becomes inaccessible, but its imagery remains alive. Rivers, trees, gold, cherubim, sacred mountains, the presence of God. These themes reappear throughout Scripture, suggesting that the memory of Eden was preserved not as a piece of forgotten cartography, but as the pattern of a lost world. And yet the geographical details are too specific to dismiss casually. The rivers keep pulling the investigation back toward the earth, toward Mesopotamia, toward ancient landscapes, toward the birthplace of cities. It was there between the Tigris and Euphrates that some of the earliest known civilizations emerged. It was there that human beings built temples, recorded flood traditions, and told stories about sacred gardens and the loss of immortality. Long before archaeologists uncovered clay tablets from ruined cities, the biblical account had already connected Eden with this region. When excavations began revealing the literature of ancient Mesopotamia, the mystery became even deeper. The tablets did not contain the Genesis account, but they preserved stories filled with familiar echoes. A land of purity, life-giving plants, divine gardens, serpents, flood survivors, and human beings who desperately sought immortality only to discover that eternal life remained beyond their grasp. The search for Eden was no longer confined to 4 rivers. It had entered the archives of the world's first civilizations. The discovery of Mesopotamian literature transformed the study of the ancient world. For centuries, the civilizations of Sumer, Akkad, Assyria, and Babylon were known primarily through the writings of the Bible and a handful of classical historians. Their cities had long since fallen into ruin, buried beneath layers of wind-blown earth, and forgotten by time. Then, in the 19th century, archaeologists began uncovering something extraordinary. Beneath the dusty mounds of modern Iraq lay vast libraries of clay tablets, preserved not by careful planning but by catastrophe. Palaces had burned, temples had collapsed, cities had been abandoned. Yet the intense heat from those ancient fires had baked thousands of clay tablets into durable ceramic-preserving voices that had remained silent for more than 3,000 years. Suddenly, historians could read the words of kings, priests, merchants, judges, and scribes. They could reconstruct forgotten empires. They could compare biblical narratives with texts written centuries before Christ. And among these discoveries were stories that seemed strangely familiar. One of the most remarkable texts was the Epic of Gilgamesh. Although remembered today as one of humanity's earliest surviving literary masterpieces, the epic is much more than a heroic adventure. It is a profound meditation on mortality, civilization, friendship, and humanity's relentless search for eternal life. Gilgamesh, king of the great city of Uruk, begins the story as a ruler consumed by power and ambition. Yet after the death of his closest companion Enkidu, his confidence shatters. For the first time, he confronts a truth no king can escape. He will die. His walls cannot protect him. His victories cannot save him. His wealth cannot purchase another day. Driven by fear, Gilgamesh abandons his throne and journeys beyond the known world, in search of the one man believed to have escaped death itself. That survivor is Utnapishtim. According to the epic, the gods once sent a catastrophic flood to destroy humanity. Warned in advance, Utnapishtim built a massive vessel, preserved life, survived the waters, and was granted extraordinary longevity. Modern readers immediately noticed the parallels with Noah. Both accounts describe divine judgment through a worldwide flood. Both feature a chosen survivor instructed to build a great vessel. Both preserve living creatures. Both conclude with the release of birds to determine whether the waters had receded. Yet similarities do not necessarily imply identical origins or identical meanings. The theological frameworks differ profoundly. In Genesis, the flood is presented within the context of one sovereign creator acting with moral purpose. In the Mesopotamian traditions, multiple gods debate, disagree, and sometimes act unpredictably. The motivations, character of the divine and ultimate message are fundamentally different. For historians, these parallels reveal something fascinating. Ancient peoples living within the same broad cultural world often preserved memories of catastrophic events, adapting those memories within their own religious traditions. Whether those memories originated from a single historical disaster, multiple regional floods, or literary development, remains a subject of ongoing scholarly discussion. The evidence allows comparison. It does not erase the distinctive identity of either tradition. But perhaps the most intriguing moment in the Epic of Gilgamesh comes after the flood story. Utnapishtim tells the weary king of a mysterious plant growing beneath the waters. Its power is astonishing. Whoever possesses it may recover lost youth. Gilgamesh dives into the deep, retrieves the plant, and believes he has finally discovered the answer to humanity's oldest question. Can death be overcome? Exhausted from his journey, he pauses to rest. While he sleeps, a serpent silently approaches. The creature steals the plant. As it disappears, it sheds its skin, symbolically renewing itself, while the human hero is left with nothing. Gilgamesh returns home empty-handed. Immortality remains beyond his reach. For students of biblical literature, this sequence is impossible to ignore. A life-giving plant. A serpent. Humanity's lost opportunity for everlasting life. These are not identical stories. The theological messages are entirely different. Yet they reveal that the ancient Near East wrestled with many of the same existential questions found in Genesis. Why do humans die? Was immortality once within reach? Why do people instinctively long for something beyond death? Such questions were not unique to Israel. They echoed across civilizations. The archaeological discoveries also revealed descriptions of sacred gardens maintained by kings and temples. In Mesopotamian religion, carefully cultivated gardens symbolized order overcoming chaos. They represented fertility blessing, divine favor, and royal authority. Flowing water was particularly significant. In a land where agriculture depended entirely upon irrigation, rivers were life itself. Without them, cities disappeared. Fields became desert. Empires collapsed. It is therefore unsurprising that sacred gardens frequently appear beside temples and royal palaces. They reflected humanity's desire to recreate paradise within an often hostile environment. Some scholars have suggested that Genesis intentionally presents Eden as the original and perfect sacred garden against which every later royal garden would be measured. Unlike human kingdoms, however, Eden required no king to conquer it. No army defended it. No slaves built it. It existed entirely by divine provision. This distinction is essential. Mesopotamian kings often celebrated themselves as builders of magnificent parks, canals, temples, and cities. Genesis begins with God as the true gardener. Humanity enters the story not as conqueror, but as caretaker. This theological reversal separates the biblical worldview from the political ideology of surrounding civilizations. As archaeologists continued excavating cities such as Ur, Uruk, Eridu, and Nippur, another remarkable pattern emerged. Many of the earliest urban centers developed precisely within the region, long associated with the Tigris and Euphrates. These cities became laboratories of civilization. Writing, mathematics, law, astronomy, architecture, organized religion, complex government, trade networks spanning thousands of miles. Human civilization accelerated dramatically in this landscape. Was this merely coincidence? Or did the biblical association between Eden and Mesopotamia preserve a genuine cultural memory that the cradle of civilization lay somewhere near humanity's earliest beginnings? Archaeology cannot answer that question definitively. What it can demonstrate is that southern Mesopotamia witnessed one of history's greatest transformations. Small farming communities evolved into cities. Cities became kingdoms. Kingdoms became empires. The world changed forever. And at the center of this transformation stood one remarkable civilization, the Sumerians. They called themselves the Black-Headed People. They built towering temples that dominated the horizon. They invented one of the world's earliest writing systems. They recorded laws, myths, hymns, business contracts, royal inscriptions, and scientific observations onto thousands of clay tablets. Their achievements shaped every civilization that followed. But alongside remarkable innovation came another recurring pattern. As cities grew, so did human ambition. Power concentrated. Kings sought glory. Empires expanded. Temples rose ever higher toward the heavens. Humanity had left the garden behind. Now it sought significance through monuments of its own making. And nowhere would that ambition become more visible than in one structure whose memory has endured for millennia. A tower reaching toward the sky. A city united by one language. A people determined to make a name for themselves. The Bible remembers it as Babel. History remembers the civilization from which it emerged. The next chapter of our journey begins not in a paradise of rivers and trees, but among the mud-brick cities of ancient Sumer, where archaeology and scripture once again intersect in one of history's greatest mysteries. The story of civilization did not begin with towering pyramids or imperial armies. It began with mud. The southern plains of Mesopotamia offered little stone, almost no forests, and an unpredictable climate. Summer temperatures climbed relentlessly, while rainfall remained too scarce to sustain large-scale agriculture. To survive, people learned to cooperate. Villages dug irrigation canals. Communities built embankments. Families worked together to redirect the waters of the Tigris and Euphrates onto fields of barley and wheat. What began as simple cooperation slowly evolved into something unprecedented. Cities. Among the earliest of these was Eridu, a settlement many Mesopotamians themselves believed to be the first city established after kingship descended from heaven. Whether this tradition reflects history or mythology remains uncertain, but it reveals something profound about how the Sumerians understood their own origins. They believed civilization itself had a sacred beginning. Not far away, another city would eventually eclipse them all. Uruk. By approximately 3,500 BC, Uruk had grown into one of the largest urban centers the world had ever seen. Its walls enclosed neighborhoods, workshops, administrative buildings, marketplaces, and enormous temple complexes. Thousands of people lived within its boundaries. For the first time in history, humanity was experiencing life not as isolated farming families, but as members of an organized urban society. Archaeology reveals a remarkable transformation. Mass-produced pottery appears. Standardized bricks become common. Long-distance trade expands. Administrative systems grow increasingly sophisticated. And perhaps most revolutionary of all, writing is born. At first, writing was surprisingly ordinary. It did not preserve poetry. It did not record philosophy. It did not tell heroic stories. Instead, it answered a practical question. How do you manage a growing city? Temple administrators needed accurate records. How much grain entered storage? How many sheep belonged to the temple? Which workers received food rations? How much land had been cultivated? Simple clay tokens evolved into pictographic marks. Those marks gradually developed into wedge-shaped impressions pressed into wet clay using reed styluses. Modern scholars call this writing system cuneiform. Thousands upon thousands of clay tablets survive. They contain contracts, tax records, marriage agreements, court decisions, medical observations, astronomical calculations, royal inscriptions, religious hymns, even children's school exercises. For the first time, ideas could survive the death of the person who spoke them. Human memory no longer depended entirely upon oral tradition. Civilization had created an archive. This invention fundamentally changed history. Without writing, archaeology tells us what people built. With writing, archaeology begins to reveal what they believed. Among those beliefs stood an extraordinary institution, the temple. Every Sumerian city revolved around its principal temple. These were not merely places of worship. They functioned as economic centers, educational institutions, political headquarters, storehouses, banks, employers. The temple owned land, managed agriculture, distributed food, supervised labor, collected offerings. Its priests interpreted divine will. Its administrators managed daily life. Religion and government were inseparable. Towering above many temples stood monumental structures known today as ziggurats. Unlike the pyramids of Egypt, which primarily served as royal tombs, ziggurats supported temples dedicated to the city's patron deity. They rose in massive step terraces above the flat Mesopotamian landscape. From miles away, travelers could see them dominating the horizon. Each level represented humanity's effort to elevate sacred space above ordinary existence. The symbolism was unmistakable. The higher one climbed, the closer one approached the divine realm. Although no surviving text identifies a specific ziggurat as the Tower of Babel, Many historians note striking similarities between Mesopotamian temple towers and the biblical description found in Genesis 11. The connection remains debated, but understanding these structures helps explain why the biblical narrative would later describe humanity attempting to build a tower with its top in the heavens. To ancient Mesopotamians, such imagery would have been immediately recognizable. Yet despite their architectural brilliance, the cities of Sumer faced a constant threat. Competition. Water was precious. Farmland was limited. Neighboring cities often fought over irrigation canals, borders, and trade routes. Archaeological excavations revealed defensive walls, weapons, destroyed buildings, and royal inscriptions, celebrating military victories. Civilization brought remarkable achievements. It also magnified humanity's capacity for conflict. The biblical narrative presents a similar tension. Genesis describes rapid technological and cultural development after humanity's expulsion from Eden. People learned metallurgy, animal husbandry, music, city building, yet alongside innovation came violence, pride, revenge, murder. The advancement of civilization did not eliminate the deeper problems of the human heart. Instead, it amplified them. This observation remains remarkably relevant. Technology changes. Human nature does not. The Sumerians produced astonishing accomplishments. They developed sophisticated mathematics using a base 60 numbering system. Our 60-minute hour, our 60-second minute, our 360-degree circle. These ancient conventions still shape modern life. They observed planetary movements, recorded eclipses, measured agricultural cycles, engineered extensive canal systems, organized large construction projects requiring thousands of workers. Their influence spread throughout the ancient Near East. Successive civilizations inherited and expanded their innovations. Babylon, Assyria, Persia, even Greece and Rome benefited indirectly from foundations first laid in Mesopotamia. Civilization had entered a new age, but another question emerges. If humanity possessed such extraordinary intelligence, why do nearly every ancient civilization preserve stories about a lost golden age? Why do cultures separated by geography often remember humanity falling from an earlier condition into suffering, mortality, and conflict? These traditions differ significantly. They should never be treated as identical. Yet their shared longing is difficult to ignore. Across continents and centuries, people remembered that something precious had been lost. Genesis offers one explanation. Humanity's separation from God fractured every relationship between humans and their Creator, between humans and one another, between humanity and creation itself. The consequences extended far beyond one garden. They shaped every civilization that followed. The cities of Sumer illustrate both the brilliance and the brokenness of human achievement. They demonstrate what people can accomplish through cooperation, intelligence, and determination. Yet they also reveal how easily power becomes concentrated, how quickly ambition overshadows humility, how rapidly cities dedicated to prosperity become cities preparing for war. This pattern would soon culminate in one of the Bible's shortest yet most influential historical narratives: a united humanity. One language, one city, one tower, one collective ambition, to make a name for themselves. For generations, artists imagined the Tower of Babel as an impossibly tall skyscraper rising into the clouds. Archaeology paints a different picture. The truth may be far more fascinating, and perhaps far more historically grounded. To understand Babel, we must first understand the civilization that inspired its imagery. The Sumerians had laid the foundation. The Akkadians would inherit it. Babylon would transform it, and one king would eventually proclaim himself master of the world, while rebuilding monuments that echoed humanity's oldest dream, the dream of reaching heaven by human effort alone. That dream would become one of Scripture's most enduring warnings, and it begins with the rise of the world's first great civilization.